Imagine a house that breathes. It opened its mouth and swallowed my brother whole. This story heals your heart, changes your fears, and makes you a great storyteller for your friends. Keep watching and read this book.
Wait, let's unpack this immediately. We're diving deep into Christina Henry's The Place Where They Buried Your Heart, and the cover, well, it doesn't really give you a soft landing, does it?
Not at all.
It promises us, right there in this stark, terrifying text, the house is awake, and it's hungry.
Yeah.
And that sets an incredibly high bar for modern horror.
It absolutely does. And the thing is, the source material here is so rich, so layered, that it actually delivers on that central promise.
It really does.
Our mission here in this deep dive is really to dissect how Henry builds that terror. Because what we're looking at isn't, your standard ghost story.
Right.
It's a masterclass in exploiting generational trauma. And it does it using this genuinely sentient predatory building. It's an entity, not just an echo of past events.
That distinction is so critical, the idea of an entity versus an echo. And at the heart of it all, we have Jessie Campanellis. She's our protagonist, and she's carrying this crushing, lifelong weight of guilt.
Over her brother, Paul.
Over her younger brother Paul's disappearance, way back in the 90s. And we see throughout the novel that Jessie's guilt, her unresolved trauma, that becomes the primary fuel source. It's the psychological anchor that lets the house maintain its power and eventually escalate its attacks.
And, structurally, it's worth noting right away that Henry gives us a narrative that it doesn't really operate like a single straight line. It's more like a study of a persistent evil across time.
Like a case file.
Exactly. The novel is fundamentally split in two. You have this long, agonizing period before the house is finally confronted and destroyed. And then you have this uneasy, ambiguous aftermath. The post-destruction phase.
And the way it jumps in time.
The temporal jumps are key. We go from the 1940s, where we get hints of the origin, to the catastrophic 1973 McIntyre massacre.
Which is just brutal.
Oh, it's horrifying. Then to the 90s, with Paul and then Jessie's father, Frank. And then it all culminates in 2006 when Jessie's own son, EF, is threatened. And these jumps just reinforce that this evil it's patient. It just waits for the most psychologically vulnerable moment to strike. Again and again.
And what immediately establishes that atmosphere of just inherent wrongness, the moment you realize this isn't standard horror, is the setting itself. It's not just any old creepy house, it's the McIntyre place, described as this rambling 3-story frame house in a very specific part of Chicago.
That Chicago setting is absolutely critical. It's not just window dressing. It's there because it highlights the house's fundamental anomaly.
How so?
Well, Chicago is historically a city of brick and gray stone, especially after the Great Fire of 1871. I mean, the building codes literally required non-combustible materials to stop that from ever happening again.
Like the fire code.
And this house, the McIntyre house, it completely defies those post-1874 regulations. It's a wooden structure in a sea of brick. That structural oddity right there, it's foreshadowing. It's telling you this thing is different, it's malignant.
It's like an insult to the city's established order. It's almost physically saying, I operate outside of human laws, both civil and, as we find out, physical.
Yes. And the source even notes that it's canted a little to one side, like there was subsidence beneath.
Which Jessie tries to explain away.
Yeah.
Right? She thinks, well, Chicago is built on a swamp. It's a rational explanation.
It's a perfectly rational explanation. But the critical detail is that none of the neighboring houses tilt that way. Only this one. This architectural deviation is the very first physical clue that something is profoundly cosmically wrong here. It's the physical manifestation of a malignant difference, anchored right in the soil of that neighborhood. ## I, Genre, and Atmosphere Foundation.
So let's begin our really extensive analysis of the foundation of this horror. Because as we've established, Henry is not content to just stay in one lane. This novel is this sophisticated cocktail of subgenres, and that's what keeps you constantly off balance. It starts with the classic supernatural stuff, but it escalates so fast into something much older and more dangerous.
Yeah.
#A. Defining the house's horror subgenre mix, layered evil.
Right. The initial layer is definitely supernatural haunting. But we have to immediately emphasize that the McIntyre house goes so far beyond being merely haunted.
It's not holding a ghost.
It is the ghost, or rather, it's an entity. The early descriptions we get from the neighborhood kids are pretty standard fare. You know, it was creepy, it had bloodstains.
The kind of stories kids tell about any abandoned house on the block.
Precisely, but Jessie's adult perception is far more visceral. She describes feeling it breathing and pulsing and glaring.
Pulsing. That word is so powerful. It's so organic. It implies life. Like a massive dormant predator, a biological force that's just masquerading as architecture.
It suggests an active, observing consciousness. It's not just the residual energy of the dead playing back old traumas on a loop. It's waiting, it's calculating, and it's fundamentally alive in a way that architecture just shouldn't be.
And that idea leads us directly into that second layer you mentioned, the architectural domestic horror.
Yes, where the physical space itself becomes the primary weapon. It corrupts the very idea of home, of safety. The fact that it's this specific, unusual 3-story frame house, a historical fire hazard, an anomaly, it makes it visually and historically wrong. It challenges your basic assumption that domesticity equals sanctuary.
And the architecture isn't passive. It's actively weaponized for specific lures. I mean, when Jessie and her partner Alex return years later, trying to figure this all out, she notices things.
What kind of things?
The back door was open. The back gate, which was always rusted and loud, had been oiled, specifically to prevent the noise that would have warned them.
So it's actively trying to be quiet, to be inviting.
Exactly. And even a stair that had been broken for years was suddenly fixed.
Okay, that detail about the fixed stair that's chilling, because that shows conscious directed effort. It's not just a random haunting. The house is engineering a comfortable, safe-looking path to entry, specifically tailored to the prey it wants to attract.
Whether it's Paul as a little boy or Jessie as a woman, returning all those years later, it's a carefully crafted invitation to its core.
It's fascinating to even just take a tangent here and compare this to other great horror architecture.
Oh, absolutely, like Hill House.
Right. Shirley Jackson's Hill House is structurally vile, it's confusing, it's nonsensical, and it twists the occupants' minds through disorientation. The house itself is insane.
Or King's Overlook Hotel. It holds residual energy, it feeds on addiction, it magnifies your personal demons, it makes you more of what you already are.
But the McIntyre house goes a step further. It's not just holding trauma or magnifying vice. The source material shows us it's learning its victims' history.
Yes.
And it's remodeling itself in real time to exploit their known personal weaknesses. That learning capability is the real terror.
And that learning capability that pushes us into the third, and I think most profound, layer of the horror here, the cosmic Eldritch horror.
This is the moment Henry truly elevates the narrative. It stops being a localized ghost story, and it's revealed through the old man's confession much later in the book in part 2.
This is where the story stops being about a bad house in Chicago and starts being about the universe itself being wrong. The house is revealed to be a conduit. It's connected to this interdimensional crack in the wall deep in the basement.
And the description of what's leaking through that crack is just pure Lovecraftian terror. It's a light that is pink and purple and blue, but not of this earth. It's described as swirling and infinite, containing actual stars.
The scale of the threat suddenly just expands dramatically. The idea that this unassuming Chicago house sits on a literal fissure in reality, a hole in the world that roared, it makes all the terrible local human tragedies that happened inside seem almost inevitable.
Or even trivial, in a way. Trivial against this vast, indifferent alien evil. It shifts the whole context from a simple haunting to a kind of cosmic malignancy, where the house is just the physical anchor for something that is fundamentally non-Euclidean and alien to our dimension.
And that cosmic entity then specializes in the fourth layer, which is the psychological horror.
Right. It doesn't just rely on claws or jump scares. It weaponizes emotional vulnerability. Jessie's deep-seated, self-imposed guilt over daring Paul into the house. That is the primary mechanism the house uses to keep her bound to it, to ensure her suffering is prolonged and exquisite, and to guarantee her eventual return.
It's the ultimate bait and switch. The house lures you in by promising the one thing you need most in the world.
Whether it's revenge or reunion with a lost loved one or comfort.
But it only delivers the specific agony that feeds it. It's a psychological vampire. It demands an emotional toll that is so much heavier than just a physical one.
So let's talk a bit more about how that mundane Chicago setting, that neighborhood, works to heighten the terror. We have this really tight-knit community, the inside people, as Jessie calls them, Ted, Sheila, Francis.
The ones who try to maintain this fragile normal existence, symbolized by those potato nugget casseroles and tuna noodle casseroles they keep bringing to the Campanellis after Paul disappears. They're the veneer of sanity.
And that veneer is crucial because it provides the contrast. They are the protective network, the human warmth that's trying to fight the house's coldness. But their normalcy is constantly undermined by the house. And what allows the house to thrive for so long is the community's initial fervent denial.
Yes, the source is so clear about that. Denial is the house's first line of defense. The adults, they would much rather believe the narrative of an itinerant serial killer or a psycho bum than accept that two hysterical, blood-covered kids, Jake and Jessie, are telling the truth about a monster.
The human narrative of evil is just easier to comprehend, right? It's easier to digest and dismiss.
Of course, if it's a serial killer, you call the police. The problem is external. It's containable.
But if it's a sentient monster that controls physics and feeds on guilt, then everyone is inherently helpless. And that collective community denial gives the entity continuous, unmolested cover to operate for decades. It doesn't need to hide. People just choose not to see it.
The narrative pacing, with those jumps across the decades 40s, 73, 90s, 2006, that's another key contributor to the mood. It demonstrates the house's generational persistence. It's not a single incident. It's a continuous rolling threat.
It shows the entity simply waits. It waits for the next set of psychologically optimized victims or the right conditions to sort of recharge.
That timeline reinforces this sense of an inescapable, timeless doom. Even when the house is silent for 8 years, after Jessie's mother Brenda disappears in '98, all the way until the threats start escalating again around 2006.
The tension is still there. It's sustained because you, the reader, and Jessie, you both know that the evil hasn't vanished. It's merely paused. That silence is just this deeply unnerving intermission before the final, more aggressive act.
And speaking of the author's style, Christina Henry's, she's known for reinterpreting fairy tales, works like Alice and Lost Boy. And you can really see that dark fairy tale influence here. The way innocence is corrupted and the way children are the preferred, most potent prey.
But she juxtaposes that dark, fantastical element with this stark, unflinching, visceral realism. This is not a horror novel that's content with just shadows and whispers.
No, not at all.
We get the terrifying reality of domestic cruelty in the McIntyre family. Glenn McIntyre, the hard man who beat his wife and children. And then we get the immediate, raw, physical shock of things like Jake's arm just being sheared off.
Or the detailed description of Tyler's mutilated body from the 1973 massacre. Or the horrific description of the nail gun incident years later. This blending, it ensures the horror feels both ancient and brutally immediate. It grounds the cosmic evil in very real, very ugly human cruelty. #C, the psychological foundation of fear, preying on vulnerability.
This extensive look at the genre, it brings us right back to the absolute core psychological mechanism of the entire book, Jessie's guilt.
It's the foundation of everything, her trauma, her connection to the house, and ultimately it's the engine that drives the whole plot. We have to analyze that moment of the dare exhaustively.
The Dare is a masterpiece of psychological precision. It's a perfect storm of typical adolescent resentment, compounded by this burst of petty, short-sighted cruelty.
She's just a teenager. She's grounded for shoplifting cigarettes. She's feeling self-pitying, desperate for independence, and she's furious that her perfect child, younger brother Paul, is annoying her.
And the resulting exchange is so simple and so devastatingly effective. Paul just wants her to stop calling him Polly. And Jessie, trying to assert her dominance over him, just replies, "Prove it."
The source material captures the casualness of it, the throwaway nature of that moment. Paul says, "If I go in there, will you stop calling me Polly?" And Jessie's internal thought is what seals the tragedy. She thinks, there's not a chance in hell you'll do it.
It was a casual dare, a tiny moment of cruelty, and it's immediately followed by ultimate irreversible consequence. He never came out.
And that consequence creates this immediate, lifelong internal condemnation. Jessie internalizes the blame for everything that follows.
Everything. Paul's disappearance, her dad's death by fire, her mom's descent into madness. She believes it was all her fault.
And this secret guilt, it solidifies her isolation. It makes her unable to fully connect with or forgive her remaining family, and later, it pushes away Alex, her partner.
That isolation and guilt, though, paradoxically, it also fuels her fierce, almost primal protective instinct for her own son, EF, years later.
And the house, because it's sentient, it uses this vulnerability as a perfectly polished mirror. It reflects the exact trauma back at the victim in a customized way.
Oh, so?
When she returns years later, trying to confront the place, she hears the music she was listening to on her Walkman that day, the Black Crows. and it immediately triggers that sickening feeling of memory and blame.
And then when she finally musters the courage to go inside the ruined house, what does she hear?
Paul's voice. Jessie, Jessie! Calling the name of the sister who sent him in. It's echoing the exact phrase a neighbor said she heard right before he died. The entity knows her history, right down to the sonic details.
But the manipulation is broader than just Jessie, isn't it? The house seems to know everyone's core desire.
Absolutely. For her father, Frank, who just completely disintegrated after Paul's loss. The house hears his desperate need for revenge and reunion. Frank is screaming, "Give me back my son, you bastard! Paul!" Paul, as he immolates himself. The house is speaking to him through his most overwhelming emotion, rage, channeled through grief.
And this tailoring of the lure it's perhaps most chillingly evidenced with the old man, the child killer who's revealed later in the narrative.
Right.
The house doesn't lure him with typical horror tropes like wealth or eternal life. It lures him with his deepest emotional longing, his dead mother, promising him power and comfort.
The old man says, "I saw my mother as whole and healthy as she had been when alive." The entity is a bespoke predator. It customizes its deception specifically to the psychological void and the selfish desires of its prey. #2, fear mechanics and psychological impact. That extensive look at the psychological foundation is...
It's a great segue into the mechanics of fear itself, how the novel actually creates the terror. It expertly alternates between this chronic, sustained dread, the long-term suffering, and these explosive moments of just shocking visceral eruption.
The chronic, sustained tension, the dread, that might be the most exhausting element of the book. The Sentinels, Jessie, Ted, Sheila, Francis, they're always watching the house. They're not just grieving, they're living under this suffocating pall, constantly aware of the monster next door, immune to the denial of the new neighbors who move in and out.
It's a continuous psychological drain, just waiting for the inevitable moment the house decides to wake up again.
That ambient dread is so crucial because it makes you, the reader, empathize with their daily psychological toll, which frankly is often harder to endure than a single horrific event. It's the stress of knowing the threat is omnipresent, but you can't define it by any conventional, rational means.
The threat isn't a shadow that appears once a week. It's the air they breathe.
But when Henry delivers the physical horror, she is. She's uncompromising. The visceral shock is extreme. It's animalistic. Take Jake's arm, for example. It's described in excruciating detail.
A ragged mess of skin and muscle and bone sheared off just above the elbow. It's violent, it's shocking, and it's immediate.
And the power of that scene isn't just the physical gore. It's the secondary trauma of the adults trying to rationalize it away. Jake's parents had to invent this absurd story of an axe-wielding killer just to provide a comprehensible human narrative for something that is fundamentally inhuman.
The physical reality defies the rational explanation. I mean, how does an axe wound shear off an entire arm and make it just disappear, poof, into the ether, as the book says? The grotesque physicality of the house's actions immediately defeats the human need for rationalization.
And the foundational brutality, the 1973 massacre, that's even more shocking. We have to acknowledge the depth of that atrocity as it's presented in the source, because that's what establishes the true capacity for destruction this entity consumed to become what it is.
The details are just relentless, and they serve a necessary narrative function. Doreen's skull cracked, Lucas's throat slit.
And Tyler, the one who had it the worst, was mutilated over and over and over again. Baby Mikey, smothered in his crib. These descriptions, they establish that the house didn't just consume life. It consumed pure, absolute destruction and suffering.
And it rooted the fantastic evil in the stark, horrifying reality of human domestic abuse. This sheer volume of trauma is what fueled the house, what allowed it to evolve into the sentient, powerful entity we see later. #B, manipulation of reader emotion and paranoia.
The house is an incredibly brilliant manipulator. It moves beyond simple jump scares, and it uses these highly sophisticated, active lures to draw its prey in. It's almost like a carnivorous plant.
We mentioned the physical lures earlier, the oiled back gate, the open back door, the safe, non-creaky stairs, all designed to bypass any rational caution a victim like Paul or Jake or Richie might possess.
It removes the natural deterrence of a dilapidated, creepy building.
And it plays the long psychological game, too.
Yeah.
The sophistication is demonstrated when Jessie returns years later and the music the Black Crows starts playing. It's not just background noise. It's an environmental control feature deployed to psychologically corner the victim by linking the location directly to her core guilt.
And this leads right into the illusion of safety, which creates this intense paranoia for the reader. When the police search for Paul, or after the inspectors die, the house pretends to be normal.
Right. The rusted gate squeals properly when the police check it. It acts exactly like a normal, dilapidated building should. It becomes a chameleon of evil.
Because the threat is ephemeral and it's undetectable by external rational authorities, you and the Sentinels realize that the only defense is constant internal vigilance. You have to rely on an intuition that everyone else just dismisses as hysteria or madness.
And that is deeply unsettling, the feeling that the threat is always present, but the entire outside world is completely blind to it.
And that paranoia, when it's projected outward, it causes this community breakdown. The external influence of the house doesn't just damage its direct victims, it damages the social fabric of the entire neighborhood.
You see neighbors turning on each other in these petty, resentful ways. Mrs. Ludwig reporting Jessie for smoking. Tanya Rufio gossiping endlessly about Paul's death. The house doesn't have to attack directly to isolate and harm its prey.
I think the most potent example of this denial and paranoia is right after the Hobbs murder-suicide. Jessie reports seeing Kyle Hobbs nail his wife, Marlena, to the wall.
Which is an unbelievably horrific image.
Unbelievable. And yet the neighbor outside doubts her. He says, what? Kyle wouldn't hurt Marlena? He wouldn't hurt a fly. Even after hearing the screaming, the default human response is denial, clinging fiercely to the comfortable narrative of neighborly normalcy rather than accepting that radical evil exists right on their block.
That denial is the house's most reliable protective barrier.
We've used this word sentient repeatedly, and I think we really need to dedicate some time to analyzing the profound difference between a place that holds residual trauma like a typical haunted house and a truly sentient entity like the McIntyre house.
It's a crucial distinction, and the source material demands we make it. Residual trauma is static. It's an imprint that plays back repeatedly, like bloodstains that always reappear, or a ghost walking the same path every night. It's a recording, exactly. But sentience is dynamic and interactive. The McIntyre house doesn't just hold the memories, it uses them. It doesn't merely react to someone entering. It proactively engineers their entry. It demonstrates this massive learning capability and an active will.
We see that learning through specific strategic actions over decades. It learns that Jessie's core vulnerability is Paul, so it uses Paul's voice, even when it knows Jessie is now an adult. It learns what external authorities look for, rational, human explanations, so it remains pristine or pretends to be a normal hazard right after a massive act of violence.
It adapts its facade depending on who is observing it.
And its awareness extends beyond simple sonic mimicry. The old man's story, it reveals the entity's ability to project a personalized, complex illusion, his dead mother, whole and healthy, offering comfort and justification for murder.
That is a level of psychological penetration that goes so far beyond a generic haunting. It requires an understanding of the individual's history, their most vulnerable emotional core, and their deepest, most selfish desires. It's personalized predation.
And its reach extends outside the physical property lines. After the Hobbs incident, Jessie thinks about the house. Creeping vines, the house pushing its malign influence out. The evil is capable of external projection. It can leverage existing darkness in people who haven't even crossed the threshold.
Which makes the environment itself the ultimate predator, one that can reach its prey anywhere on the block where denial or trauma already exists.
This capacity for external influence is what makes it so dangerous. The house doesn't need to force Glenn McIntyre to become cruel or force Kyle Hobbs to commit murder-suicide. It just needs to find that spark of darkness that's already present, the cruelty, the rage, the despair, and amplify it to catastrophic, murderous levels.
The entity's intelligence is defined by its efficiency as a psychological force multiplier for human depravity. It's like a black hole for human morality.
And its specific preference for children. It always did prefer children, the book says. That suggests a targeted energy source. It's likely seeking the profound, raw trauma that results from the loss of innocence or the corruption of familial love. That must produce a very potent emotional yield for its sustenance. #tags3, character psychology under siege.
The brilliance and the impact of this novel, at the end of the day, it hinges entirely on how effectively Henry portrays the characters reacting to the siege, particularly Jessie, because her vulnerability is so exposed and so relatable.
Jessie's initial state is rooted in just simple, mundane adolescent resentment. She's grounded for shoplifting cheap cigarettes. She's feeling resentful, self-pitying, desperate for independence from her controlling all-caps mother, as she calls her.
And her initial tragic action, the Barrett, it stems directly from that ultimate weakness. the need to prove herself right and assert some temporary dominance over her brother.
Her survival mechanism is incredibly complex, and it evolves over the course of the narrative. Initially, after Paul disappears, it's just avoidance and acting out. Being a fuck-up, as she says, to create distance from the unbearable truth of what she did.
But later, she undergoes this profound transformation, and this change isn't born of, emotional healing or therapy. It's born of a manic, guilt-driven energy to secure safety for her son, EF. He's the one she must protect at all costs.
And we should clarify for you, EF is Jessie's young son. He's the most perfect thing in her life, and his safety becomes the single driving force for her adult confrontation with the house. The source shows her immense, visceral love for him. She says, "My heart left my body forever," solely shaped in the form of this most perfect human.
And that love is contrasted so starkly by the immense cost of her withholding the truth for so long. Jessie carries the burden of that dare alone for decades.
This prevents her from achieving any true connection or forgiveness with her mother, Brenda, or later with Alex, her partner. The secret solidifies her isolation, but it also creates this strange, necessary protective shield. She can't trust anyone fully because she knows the depth of her own original sin.
Her transformation is driven by that protective instinct. It moves her from a selfish, resentful love to this fiercely primal, sacrificial love for EF. And that primal drive is what allows her to withstand the house's attempts to lure her to her death, because she now has something monumentally more important than her own self-pity or her need for closure.
She becomes a mother warrior.
Frank Campanellis, Jessie's father, is... He's the very definition of a tragic figure. He represents the total disintegration of a man who is defined by his role as a loving father.
After Paul's loss, he becomes a shade. He obsessively rearranges food until it didn't resemble food at all. He starts smoking again, making himself dry and combustible as tinder in a drought.
That imagery of combustibility is just this massive piece of foreshadowing, leading to the horrific climax of his grief, his self-immolation.
He pours gasoline over himself and ignites, seeking either reunion with Paul or revenge on the house. He's screaming, "Give me back my son, you bastard." But here is the critical detail. The terrifying display of the house's power is its malignant refusal to burn.
This is one of the most lasting and terrifying images in the entire novel for me. Frank is a gas-powered inferno, yet the house does not catch fire. The source notes that afterward, there wasn't even a black mark on the stairs where he'd lain.
This shows the house actively protecting itself and exercising this malignant power over fundamental physical laws. It demonstrates the human-scale destruction, even in the form of a man driven mad by grief, is utterly meaningless to this entity. It is impervious to human vengeance.
Brenda Campanellis, the mother, endures an equally horrifying descent into madness and obsession. We see the physical signs of her unraveling, the broken glass incident, holding Paul's framed photo without actually looking at it.
And the macabre creation of the stuffed effigy of Frank.
The effigy is profoundly disturbing. She creates an ersatz spouse made from his old clothes, with photos pinned to a stuffed t-shirt for a head, and she sleeps with this fabrication of her lost family. She has chosen madness and fabrication over reality.
And her final act, crucially, is not spontaneous. She isn't lured by a ghost's voice. It is planned.
She leaves her engagement and wedding rings in a box for Jessie to find. It's this final, cold statement of her choice. She walks willfully into the house, seeking reunion with her lost son and husband.
That final, conscious abandonment of her living daughter, choosing death and madness over remaining with Jessie, is perhaps the cruelest emotional blow inflicted by the house's legacy. #C. The antagonist entity's motivation and psychology, pre- and post-mortem.
To truly confront this entity, we have to analyze its human facilitators, the seeds of the evil. And that starts with Glenn McIntyre, the abusive man from 1973. He was the initial fuel source.
Glenn was already a hard man. He was cruel, a monster, even before the house amplified his nature. He was the catalyst who committed the catastrophic violence of 1973, providing the sheer volume of trauma the house needed to evolve into a powerful, sentient being.
But the true depth of the entity's motivation and its psychological reach that comes through the old man's confession. This man, Glenn's childhood friend, reveals that he wasn't Glenn, but he was the one who helped feed Glenn's mother to the crack in the wall decades earlier.
And then decades later, he himself becomes this methodical child killer, claiming 11 victims over time.
And his motivation reveals the house's terrifying method of manipulation. He believed he was performing an act of warped, selfless love for his mother. The entity, disguised as his dead mother, convinced him that the children he murdered needed to be saved from future suffering.
He said he could see the cancer that would grow there, around them, illuminated by the pink glow from the crack. He committed these monstrous acts under the delusion that he was performing a righteous service.
This highlights the entity's core desire. It wants children, and it wants the trauma of those who remain behind. Its intelligence isn't logical or understandable in human terms, but it is highly effective at exploiting the human capacity for warped love, for selfish delusion, and for the desire to control one's own fate.
The old man's story transitions the house from being a simple, territorial predator to a cosmic intelligence that's capable of manipulating reality and morality on a grand scale. It uses the human capacity for self-deception and delusion to expand its reach and ensure its constant supply of sustenance. Hashtag 5 feet. Plot, themes, and philosophy. Okay, let's examine how the narrative structure and the themes all coalesce to create this unique horror experience. Let's focus on the escalation and the philosophical underpinnings of the story. Hashtag CAX, horror plot structure and escalation of conflict.
The plot is expertly structured around what we can really call a trauma loop. The inciting incident, Paul's disappearance in the 90s, generates Jessie's guilt and the resulting madness of her parents.
And this trauma leads to Frank's death, Brenda's disappearance, and Jessie's own guilt-fueled survival. It's a cycle of suffering that just endlessly sustains the entity.
And the major structural shift in the plot is the escalation of the threat from internal to external. Initially, back in the 1990s, the house primarily attacks those who enter it. Paul, Dad, Jake.
Right, you had to cross the threshold.
Kept cross the threshold. But by 2006, the evil has expanded its reach significantly. The Hobbs murder-suicide, the disappearance of Aiden Novak, and the direct lure of Jessie's son, EF, show the house projecting its influence externally. It's no longer confined strictly to its physical walls.
And that external projection is what forces the final, inevitable confrontation. When the city finally decides to tear the cursed place down, the house actively fights back.
The bulldozers literally bounce off an invisible wall or a force field. Workers are injured or killed by collapsing debris and unexplained accidents. The house forces the Campanellis to realize that physical demolition is impossible without internal intervention, a direct, targeted attack on its malignant core.
It's the ultimate acknowledgement that trauma can't be removed by simple physical means. You can't just demolish grief. The supernatural evil is literally defying the material world's attempts to eliminate it.
Which is why we see that city worker make the Malakio sign. It's this human recognition of an inexplicable ancient foe that operates outside our rules.
One of the novel's most compelling thematic arguments is the power of denial. The narrative consistently shows how authorities, police, neighbors, they all refuse to accept the supernatural truth. They prefer the easy, familiar narrative of a psycho bum, a serial killer, or a freak accident sinkhole.
And this denial, as we've discussed, it's the entity's most potent shield. If the problem is human, it can be contained by human systems. Jails, hospitals, police.
But if it's cosmic, then society is helpless. And that is a terrifying existential truth people just cannot accept. That community-wide denial provides the entity with decades of cover to operate completely unmolested.
And this leads us to the critical philosophical debate at the heart of the book. Human nature versus malign influence. I firmly believe the source material supports the idea that the entity cannot create evil, it can only amplify it.
The idea that the house can only spark off something that's already there.
Exactly. You can apply that to every major event. Glenn McIntyre was already a hard man. The entity provided the mechanism and the motive to amplify his inherent cruelty into mass murder.
Kyle Hobbs must have had some dormant rage or darkness the house leveraged for the nail gun murder-suicide. And even Jessie's own petty cruelty towards Paul, the dare that was the necessary human spark that initiated the tragedy for her family.
The house feeds on existing flaws. It doesn't create them ex nihilo.
The narrative also beautifully contrasts the toxic, guilt-ridden mothering of Brenda with Jessie's transformation into this fiercely protective mother.
Brenda's grief-fueled love for her dead family overrides her duty to her living daughter, and that leads to her willful departure into the house.
But Jessie's protective instinct for EF, however, is a primal moral necessity that drives her to confrontation and ultimately to victory. Her love for EF acts as the antidote to the house's emotional poison.
And finally, the theme of memory and truth is really embodied in Paul's ghost. He's not a typical malevolent or guiding spirit. He is a permanent, terrified recording.
He knows exactly how every person who ever died in this house did so, because he is reliving the house's memory loop over and over and over again.
He is trapped within the entity's consciousness, yet his own spirit, fueled by his love for his sister and their shared memory, it survives as this internal guide, helping Jessie navigate that final, treacherous maze in the basement.
So destroying the house isn't just an act of vengeance, it's a necessary act of liberation for Paul and all the other victims trapped within its malignant consciousness. #V, scare analysis and literary context.
All right, now we can get into the pure mechanics of the scares, the sensory details, and the literary scaffolding that holds this whole complex horror narrative together. #A, effective scare moments and imagery.
Henry relies so heavily on sensory horror to bypass the reader's rational defenses. The olfactory manipulation is highly effective. That persistent, sickening scent of rot.
Smelled by Ritchie in 1990, by the neighbor Ryan in 1997, and then by the city workers in 2006. That smell confirms the presence of death and malignancy, even when the visual evidence is inconclusive. It makes the location just repulsive and fundamentally unhealthy.
And the auditory manipulation is crucial to the psychological attack. The house is a master of mimicry. It uses familiar sounds to disarm and lure. Paul's voice calling, "Jessie, Jessie." The phantom footsteps, the sounds of laughter. It uses what is most familiar and comforting to lure victims to their doom.
And the hob scene, as we've noted, that provides the high point of visceral shock outside the walls of the house itself. The imagery of Marlena being stitched to the paint with nails, requiring Kyle to reload the nail gun.
It's specific, it's gruesome, and it's profoundly disturbing because it uses mundane objects. Tools of construction used against the sanctuary of the home. This is the house explicitly projecting its evil into the domestic sphere and weaponizing everyday reality.
And the imagery of the final confrontation in the basement, that brings everything together. It moves from the mundane to the cosmic. We transition from this bright, clean, mimetic kitchen with the chicken decorations moving and ground beef packets falling from the sky.
A bizarre, failed attempt at creating domestic normalcy.
Exactly. And we go from that to the dark, chilling basement. And the heart of the entity itself it's anticlimactic, and yet it's perfectly repulsive. A tiny, mucus-covered box that smells faintly of rot.
That tiny, disgusting, fragile box is the perfect final image.
Yeah.
The cosmic, omnipotent evil is rooted in something small, organic, and frankly pathetic. A physical anchor that can be destroyed.
It makes the destruction immediate and achievable despite the house's previous vast, intangible power.
Okay, let's take the literary context deep dive and really place Christina Henry's work. While the novel features familiar tropes, a supernatural house, familial trauma Henry successfully forges a unique path by blending this intense psychological realism with a genuine sense of cosmic despair.
If we set Henry next to, say, Stephen King, we see a crucial difference. King often uses the supernatural, like the Overlook Hotel in The Shining, as this potent metaphor for human flaws. Addiction, alcoholism, inherited abuse. The Overlook magnifies Jack Torrance's personal demons.
Henry definitely incorporates that magnification. The house amplifies the cruelty in Glenn McIntyre and the despair in Frank Campanelli, but where she clearly leans into Lovecraftian horror is with the interdimensional crack.
Yes, Lovecraftian horror is defined by entities that are massive, ancient, and fundamentally indifferent to humanity. Their reality is non-Euclidean and incomprehensible.
And the old man's confession is pure Lovecraft, encountering colors that are not of this earth, seeing infinite stars in a crack in the basement wall, and feeling this psychic pull that compels monstrous actions under the guise of a warped necessity.
And furthermore, the basement maze that the neighbor Ryan experiences, where distances are impossible and perspective shifts. That's textbook non-Euclidean geometry. The house isn't evil because it was built on a bad foundation. It's evil because it serves as an orifice for something that should not exist in our dimension.
The genius of the blend, then, is pitting the most basic human defenses against this cosmic indifference. And we see this tension illustrated so vividly by the Malakio sign.
The Malakio sign, that silver charm with the index and pinky fingers up, protection against the evil eye, is a piece of ancient localized folklore. It's a culturally specific human defense mechanism against bad luck or minor evil.
So to see a terrified, modern city worker fighting a sentient house that defies physics make that exact same specific sign, it's incredibly resonant.
It signifies that when they're facing this incomprehensible, non-Euclidean evil, the characters instinctively revert to the most ancient protective superstitions they know. It is human belief and folklore pitted directly against cosmic indifference. #C. The importance of the ghost of Paul.
We've touched on it. But Paul's ghost has this singular narrative function that demands a bit more analysis. He is key to the resolution, and he's so distinct from any traditional vengeful or warning spirit.
Paul is crucial because he is not a vengeful entity. He is a traumatized, permanent recording of the house's history. He confirms that everything bad that ever happened plays back all the time, like a constantly rewound movie in the house's consciousness.
He knows exactly how every person who ever died in this house did so, because he is forced to relive the house's collected malignant memories.
He's trapped within the entity's consciousness, yet his own love for his sister, their shared memory of her, survives as this internal guiding mechanism. It's his love and his knowledge that allows Jessie to navigate the final, treacherous maze and locate the physical heart of the entity.
Paul represents the ultimate cost and the ultimate tool. His permanent terrified presence validates Jessie's grief and fuels her final sacrificial push. And his liberation, the destruction of the house freeing his spirit from that agonizing loop, is the true emotional closure of the novel. And it's only achieved by destroying the physical vessel that held the entity's collected trauma. #Final Horror Assessment and Verdict. So bringing this comprehensive analysis to a close, let's evaluate the book's overall horror effectiveness and its lasting impact. #A, overall horror effectiveness and target audience.
The book is profoundly effective because the horror is so intensely emotionally earned. You, the reader, are invested in Jessie's need for closure and, most urgently, the protection of her son, EF.
This successful blend of the mundane horror of familial dysfunction, the McIntyre abuse, Jessie's resentment, with this profound, inescapable supernatural evil makes the tension unrelenting and personal.
For our audience, we absolutely must issue content warnings, though, due to the book's absolute commitment to depicting raw trauma. The descriptions of domestic violence, self-harm like Frank's immolation, and the graphic details of the Hobbs incident. They require a strong constitution. Henry does not shy away from the visceral, immediate consequences of violence.
It's also important to revisit the role of community here, specifically the inside people, Ted, Sheila, Francis, Jake. They form this network of moral duty.
Their refusal to leave is driven by a deep, shared sense of responsibility to watch against the monster. They function as a necessary protective counterforce to the greater community's pervasive denial. #B, the most unique and lasting horror elements.
So if we had to pinpoint the features that guarantee this novel a place in modern horror history, what are the three most unique and lasting images or concepts?
First and foremost, we have to highlight again the anti-combustible house. That single image of Frank Campanelli collapsing on the stairs as a blazing star, a gas-powered inferno, yet leaving not even a black mark on the wood. It's a chilling testament to the house's absolute control over physics.
It perfectly establishes that human destruction, even self-immolation, is utterly meaningless to this entity's internal reality.
Second, the Sentient Trap. The house's ability to tailor its attack mimicking loved ones like Paul's voice or the old man's mother, and actively engineering scenarios like oiling the gate, fixing the stair, deploying specific memory-laced music. That is its greatest psychological weapon.
It forces the characters to question not just their physical environment, but the integrity of their own memories and their intuition.
And finally, the ambiguous resolution. The after chapter ensures the horror doesn't end cleanly. The house is reduced to debris, a pile of broken wood, it's gone. But Jessie still sees a flash of pink or purple or the glittering of stars inside its shadows at the construction site.
The crack in the world may be less potent, but it remains. Jessie understands she must remain vigilant, watching for those creeping vines of influence. The physical battle is won, but the war against cosmic malignancy is never truly over. It's only displaced. #tag outro.
So this deep dive into the place where they buried your heart has been this exhaustive examination of trauma, guilt, and the thin, often broken veneer of normalcy that separates human life from cosmic malignancy. The novel successfully argues that the most potent horrors are those that find their physical anchor in an ancient entity, but draw their sustenance from the deepest, most vulnerable parts of the human heart.
Which leaves us with the final provocative thought for you to consider. Given that the old man, the child killer, claimed the entity only amplified existing darkness, and given Jessie's own acknowledgement that her heart holds darkness because of that original selfish dare, did the final destruction of the physical house truly eradicate the evil?
Or did it merely remove the focus for the deep-seated darkness already present in the human heart, requiring Jessie, and maybe the rest of us, to now turn inward and confront the darkness we carry ourselves?
A fitting and eternally challenging question. Until next time, remember the insidious power of denial and the necessity of facing uncomfortable truths, both in literature and in life.
Keep watching the shadows.
And don't ever take a dare.